Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Leader Series. We've got Elizabeth Press from D3M Labs, which is a data blog and an online community. We go through a lot about how data can give real business outcomes, and Elizabeth is an evangelizer for that, and someone that I feel has got a really interesting kind of point of view about how we can best lead technology to help drive businesses. So, without further ado, here's Elizabeth Press from D3M Labs. Thank you. Elizabeth, hi. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
How are you today?
I'm great. And yourself?
I am not too bad. Yes, I'm. It's it's spring, or it's April when we were doing this, April 23, and the sun is finally out in Britain. So I know you're in Germany, so probably got the same sort of weather as us, but it's been a very cold, dark, rainy winter. So today it actually feels like we're out the other side of it. If you know what I mean. I don't know what it's like in Germany for you.
In Berlin, it's
Yeah.
pretty much the same. It's been, rainy and sunny and even a bit snowy and haily, which is
Yeah, we want to get away from that, get to the summer, don't we? So it's all been too bad news, if you know what I mean. But great to have you here. For our listeners' benefit, we've got Elizabeth Press here. She is the creator and owner of D3M Labs, which is a blog which is based around data. And we're going to go into quite a lot of kind of data detail about it. We've been really interested in following it over the last kind of few years. It's been going for 10 years. And Elizabeth's been very helpful talking to us in our data community. But we're always interested in speaking to leaders in our network, and we felt that it'd be great to get Elizabeth on to have her own show, as it were, and to talk here. So welcome, Elizabeth. It's been great to speak to you. But obviously, I've done a little bit of introduction to D3M, but where we always like to start is just to kind of understand from your side a little bit about the kind of the organization you represent, and maybe some of the kind of key messages that you're trying to kind of get across in the blog and in the community.
Yeah, sure. So D3M is data driven decisions and
Very
data
good.
driven decision making. And that is the name of the blog, the Data Driven Decision Making blog,
Yeah.
but it's also coming from the fact that decisions are how we get value out of data.
Mm,
And the blog is really aimed at getting value out of data. And when I say value out of data, I mean financial value.
sure.
So, how could companies and organizations manage their data teams and their data assets in a way that is financially profitable? And the way it came about was between 2015 and 2020. I call it D3M Labs
Mm,
1.0. It was actually a consulting company
right.
where
Okay.
I worked with startups and also corporates running data innovation programs. I then became a data leader. And then recently, in October of 2022,
Mm,
there was some inspiration and I was able to scale the blog to other people and build this community
mm,
to really talk with each other about how we as data practitioners, as data leaders, also people in the adjacent professions and the investors, how we could all work together and actually make data work in a financially sustainable way.
for yourself, obviously, because I've kind of looked at the blog, and obviously the community and the consultancy. Um, Two questions really. So, as you made that decision to kind of move it more to a blog, and I'm quite interested in that kind of element of that online community. You know, how did that has that kind of changed your working practices? Because I know you come from like a journalistic background right in the past. So is it like kind of going full circle, kind of back to when you kind of producing content, producing stories, that sort of thing? Is it quite exciting for you as a leader?
Yeah, yes,
Yeah.
definitely. It's a completely different business model. The 2.0, the blog and the
Mm,
community, is an advertising and sponsorship business model.
Yeah.
as opposed to a consulting business model, and the work is completely different.
Mm,
So it's a lot about creating relevant content, getting the
mm.
relevant conversation going, and really building something that means a lot to a lot of people,
Yeah. Yeah.
rather than doing projects and bringing organizations forward, which is meaningful to people. But I feel like the blog is more brought to a broad base of people. And
Mm.
yes, the daily work is much more journalistic than like hands-on practitioner like.
And do you, when you're kind of sat at your desk in the morning, do you kind of feel, you know, that you have to have that kind of innovation? Because I always find for myself it's quite kind of interesting when you think about kind of your daily activities, that sort of thing. Have you had to kind of like manage yourself slightly differently in terms of the kind of the way you work? Because I guess when you're working on a project for an organization or an employer, there's a list of tasks, isn't there, that's kind of set out by the project. Whereas this is maybe more kind of as an entrepreneur, maybe more kind of, you know, down to yourself to kind of decide on a day-to-day basis what's happening, where we're going, the vision itself.
I think in anything, you need goals and you need processes.
Mm,
So people are surprised when I tell them that D3M Labs actually has processes. I have
yeah.
my own processes, how I get the people I interview,
Mm,
how I agree with them, the scope of the work, how I get the content and create the content, how I edit it, how I post it, how I also look at SEO. And the processes get more complicated over time as there's more elements that I put
yeah.
in.
Yeah.
For example, SEO and Google Analytics and these
Mm,
things, and how I organize my time. But I think, especially when you're an entrepreneur and you're starting on your own thing, you need to be super duper organized.
yeah, for
And
sure.
I think processes are something you even need with one person to really do something on scale.
And I think yeah, it is important, isn't it? It's like writing a book or something like that, isn't it? You have to kind of drive yourself forward, and these are the things we're going to kind of do. But there's not maybe so many people to kind of pick you up on the other side, like a boss or a, you know, an investor or something like that. You need to kind of, you know, have that drive. And the other thing I think is really important about D3M, and I think this is obviously something we've already spoken about, is that what you're driving with the blog and driving with the community is that you feel that people can use data both in terms of society and in terms of business. You know, you've mentioned the kind of the financial kind of imperative, but just you feel that it can be improved within the commercial and business world. So and I think you're doing that from experience. But I guess that links into some kind of challenges that are there in the data world at the moment, and that's, you know, from my research within D3M, that's one of the things you're talking about quite a lot. So, how would you categorize those key challenges? You know, what is it that we're trying to improve here, and what are the key kind of tasks that need to happen?
Well, I think anytime you're looking at financial value, which is, let's say, return on investment, you have what you get out of it and what you put into it, the cost. So if we just categorize those two elements, there is the what you get out of it. So the insight, the even an automated decision making tool like a recommendation engine or something like that. What do you get out of it? What's the value? And data needs to get much better at getting that value. So I think that first of all, the analysts who are the front lines to the business, they need to be able to be maybe embedded in the business, but there needs to be a focus on what the data is actually used for and the decision making, rather than coding. Or often analysts are spending a lot of time coding, correcting code, doing things that are not analytical output. And I think that there needs to be a focus on that, but also a focus on stop the ad hoc work. And analysts are just sort of looking up information, but make analysts actually embedded in the decision making process and make them part of the decision making rather than just at the end of it. And I think that's how you get more output. And I would say also in terms of an artificial intelligence or machine learning product, let's say like a recommendation engine, that is something also that needs to be managed in a very professional way. There's product management for data science products as well. So we have to get away from this artisanal data science that we have had in the last decade and really create a data science culture that is embedded in the business and where algorithmic products are managed just like any other product.
Yeah. I think it's that kind of element of data sometimes in that it's when you're using words like analytics and science and even the word data, people are obviously, lay people, and I'm going to include myself in that. And this is where I guess you kind of stride the two sides, right? So you kind of come from that background where you come from a journalist background, a functional background, international economics background, moving into data. So you kind of have empathy, as it were, for the person that uses it, that uses the output, but doesn't
Mm-hmm.
really understand how the output is put together. I think for me, using and understanding data, you kind of read about what the output is, but I guess you understand because you understand both sides what more can actually be achieved and how it can be achieved better. So, myself, if I see some data reports or a recommendation engine or something like that, I'm like, oh, that's clever. That works really well, but you know more what could actually be achieved if the investment was done correctly and the output was targeted in the right way.
Yeah. And so I would say then the other side of the equation is the cost side. And I think this really needs to be brought under control as well. And I think that what's changing now is you do see low code, no code coming out. You do see human understandable data pipelines. I think that these armies of junior coders who would integrate these very complicated, or they were made to be complicated and often unnecessarily complicated data pipelines together and be forever fixing them, that generated huge amounts of costs. The cloud computing pay as you go, where people would make these queries that were completely not optimized, and there would be no data governance, and people would just leave queries running crazy costs for a long time and not look at that until the costs were the problem. And I think that data has to grow up and it has to become more of a like I don't want to say a normal, but more like any other function where costs are controlled, where there is governance. And I think that that really needs to grow up. So the data function has to grow up, but also stakeholders and the business has to grow up and they have to stop using data like an ad hoc question machine.
Yeah, you should have data-driven decisions, but you should be able to make the best possible decisions with best possible data for the, like you're saying, the best possible cost, right?
Yeah, and that needs product thinking. So you have
Yep.
to look at data output as a product like anything else. We were talking about recommendation engines,
Mm.
but you also have things such as dashboards or even
Yep.
insights and deep dives. And these have to be properly scoped out.
Mm.
They have to be planned for, and that has to be able to be managed, and the data has to be managed like an asset. Data is extremely expensive for a company to collect, to keep. Data professionals are expensive, and their time has to be managed much better. And they have to also have the freedom to do that, and not have this service desk
Yeah,
way of working
mentality.
that many of them are
Mm.
forced into.
Yeah, one of the things we talk about quite a lot in the Leaders series as a kind of warning to all IT people is the Microsoft Excel question, which is IT is working heavily to kind of implement a CRM system or a dashboard or a data set, and then salespeople are sat there with an Excel spreadsheet, basically doing all the things that are being might even spend hundreds of thousands or millions of pounds or euros to implement, and then someone's like, yeah, I've got a spreadsheet for that. And I think Microsoft obviously invented a very clever tool when they invented Excel, which must wind IT people up intensely when they think, why are you using this spreadsheet when I've created this beautiful piece of software? But then you must also think, well, if someone could do it on an Excel spreadsheet, like those are the actual pieces of data they want, right?
Yeah, I mean, Excel has stood the test of many innovation cycles and people trying to eradicate it from their organization, and yet it's still there. One has to give Microsoft credit for that. Now there's Google
Yeah,
Sheets, but
yeah, yeah,
um,
yeah. It's right where everyone's trying to jump on the bandwagon, aren't they? But I think that it's really really important, and I think kind of coming back to that data question, the other kind of challenge that obviously we talk about quite a lot with data is the whole idea of the use of data itself in terms of
mhm.
the GDPR questions obviously that we have in Europe, data protection, cyber security, etc., etc. Do you feel that potentially that as a data specialist, sometimes people are looking more for the output from the data. So therefore, they're not thinking so much about the kind of the social challenges, et cetera, that you have within the data. Or sometimes do you feel that sometimes people are kind of worrying too much about the data protection elements and the security elements, and they're not kind of they're trying to kind of challenge those to kind of work through to get the best outputs. What do you think are the most what kind of highest priorities for the data people that you speak to?
So I won't get into the politics of data privacy,
Yeah, yeah,
okay?
yeah.
But I will say that I do see that sometimes schools or whatever, or volunteer groups sometimes struggle with GDPR and to try to get it right. So
Mm.
maybe there's something that needs to be done for those groups to make it more workable.
Yeah.
But in terms of organizations and data, I think that data needs to grow up, and I think that people need to maybe see these privacy elements as part of growing up. I mean,
Mm.
when you work in the financial sector, you also have compliance. Compliance
Yeah.
is huge. So, this is part of data actually becoming a grown up function where you have to
Yep.
have governance, you have to have traceability,
Mm.
observability, and it can't just be these like messy data sets everywhere that the way it has been for the past 10 years, like if you go to many organizations. So it's how you look at it.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I
I think
think it's
that's really.
really a chance to
Mm.
really take the organization to the executive level, like take the
Yeah.
data organization to the executive level and get involved in those sort of business process type conversations and
Mm.
strategic conversations rather,
Yeah.
and that needs to be the view of data. How could we actually use this compliance and this, these new elements that we have to take into account to make ourselves actually more viable,
Yeah. More
rather than,
useful to the business. Yeah, yeah. No, rather than
yeah,
seeing it as a kind of an obstacle to get around. If you're I guess if you look at data like an asset, then the accountancy world or the world of the accountancy team is or finance is one where that's respected and it's kind of works in a kind of grown up way, as you say. And they expect to be audited every year, don't they? A full proper audit in terms of everything you've done with every single pound, penny and pence, or euro and cent. In terms of what's happened. Whereas other elements of the industry, that's really a kind of where they should kind of get to. So no, I think it's really interesting, and again, it's that kind of dark art element of it sometimes even for C-suite people. They're not necessarily so locked into how are we producing this data, what could we actually get from this data, how much is it costing us, even is the cost the right cost, could it be less, could it be more, if I invested more could I get more, etc., etc. I think people are quite in the dark art of it, I guess. From doing something like D3M, that's what you're trying to help, like you're trying to kind of pull back the curtain somewhat and show people kind of how to overcome those challenges and what they should be expecting, right?
Yeah, it's to change behavior and to change the mindset. And I think the world is waking up to this. I mean, there's some rude awakenings like interest rates. So money isn't so cheap anymore. And there is more of a cost to the burn rate. Okay. And data has been part of this burn rate. Let's put it out there. And then there's all these layoffs. So, people have gotten consequences to this sort of behavior. And this is, I think that there is something out there in the community, and that's, I think, why D3M Labs is getting much bigger and growing, is because people realize, look, we have to get better. We have to actually be able to observe the data. We have to be able to produce value in a much more visible way, in a much more sustainable way going forward if we want to have a stable livelihood, if we want to get somewhere in our careers, and these sorts of also very personal aspirations as well.
Yeah. So if we look at the one of our target audiences is the leaders, that will be
Mhm.
listening to this, and if they're struggling maybe with their data teams and how to improve, obviously the first thing they should do is become a member of D3M, and then read your advice, or maybe even reach out to you, Elizabeth, and say help me. But what are the kind of key things that a leader should do to kind of think about those challenges? What sort of structure should they set up to have a more successful data team?
Well, they need to understand the business because data is a function that doesn't exist for itself. It exists within the fabric of a business. So they need to understand what the business strategy is. And on the other hand, the people like at the top, the C suite, the CEO, has to involve the data people from the beginning. There needs to be a mindset change as well. The data people can't be always trying to get into the room. But then also the data people have to become more business minded. Data has to become a business function. And I think that the real killer of, I would say, the ability of a data function to create ROI is the fact that it is seen as an IT function when it is in fact a business function. Because data is an extremely valuable asset to the business. And data will be used either to drive good decision making as well as to be part of the product, to be a smart, there's the smart devices, the algorithmic products, so also automated processes. Data is an integral part of any modern enterprise.
Mm. Yeah, no, I guess it like links into something like kind of human resources, like, which is obviously the element that GCS works in, and the change over the last few years for it to become talent. Obviously talent's a cool word, but I think it definitely changes the game somewhat in terms of the asset of having human beings. And what you're talking about here is having the asset of data, and how you best use it, in the same way as you should look at your workforce and say, how can we best use those? Then it's not just a number, it's an asset, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Hmm. And I mean, when you kind of work with organizations, when you think about how the business kind of works, and that sort of thing, what are the first kind of pieces of advice that you give to other kind of data leaders, and people that you're kind of working with, when people first kind of come into the D3M world? How do you kind of set off to kind of on that path to having good data management and good data outcomes?
Well, I will say that it's a blog and a data community, so it's people get into the discussions in how the discussions are going on at the moment. So it's a lot of people are, hearing about this from their friends, and I post on LinkedIn a lot. There's a newsletter that people could sign up for, and they look at the newsletter and they forward it to their friends and their colleagues. So it's generally people get interested in a topic that we're talking about, and the topics are very varied, and they're also brought up by the community. So there are a lot of guest bloggers and also teams that co-host roundtables and decision labs. And it's really based on people's interest, and that's what it's driven by. And of course, I do things like I listen to social media and the news, and also from my own experience, I bring up topics. So it's sort of like a crowdsourced way to get the topics. So people will come in based on the topics that we're talking about at the moment, and they'll stay because they find the conversation very interesting.
That's great. That's quite interesting, exciting, sorry, for you to see this. This is, like your creation kind of coming alive in front of you, right? I guess you're, looking at the impressions, looking at the kind of the membership numbers, looking at
Mm.
the amount of new content. You wake up in the morning and there's a new thread on there, and you're like, wow, I didn't even do this. It must be exciting for you to see.
Yeah, I mean, what's really interesting is that it impacts people's lives. So a lot of data people are immigrants or migrants, whatever you want to call them, people who move between countries, and a lot of people who end up at the D3M Labs Stammtisch. That's like a regulars table, like every these monthly meetings in restaurants or whatever, are people who've moved from other countries to Germany, and they're just meeting people, and they write a blog or they get interviewed, and they'll be like sharing it with their parents and everything. So it's also very personal to people. And I see that people also make a lot of personal contacts. They recruit each other. They also hang out with each other. So it's even it's quite personal and meaningful to people, and I think that that's really interesting.
And from that community at the moment, obviously, you mentioned a little bit about layoffs there, but obviously you're really hearing how people are seeing the world at this moment. And we know for everyone, it's been a challenging few years. And let's put it into kind of relations for some people in some countries even more challenging, right? These are 21st century or Western problems. But what's the sort of kind of the sense you're getting from your community in terms of their thoughts about kind of layoffs and kind of economic downturns and what are your thoughts about it? Because obviously we're talking about cost and
Mm.
investment here, and it does seem that you know businesses are taking quite a harsh stance at the moment on over hires within the technic community and making quite a lot of quite drastic cutbacks. So what is your community saying about that and what's their feelings?
Well, at every Stammtisch, or at these monthly
Mm,
meetings, people ask who's unemployed. It's like the
yeah,
first question when people come in: Do you have your job, or
yeah,
have you found a job? So that is a huge part of the conversation: is
mm,
people's employment status, and of course the impact of that. And
yeah,
as I said, a lot of the people are newcomers to Germany. So I've been here for 20 years. Okay.
mm,
I know this country, I speak this language, and
mm,
I have a pretty stable existence
mm,
here. A lot of people who've been laid off are coming from very different countries, don't
mm,
have a stable status, don't have money necessarily, and
mm,
have to deal with things like losing their apartments, which they're
yeah,
subletting, or they're
or
like
guarantors and
three layers
yeah,
of
mm,
subletting, trying to find a job in a country that they don't understand, not
mm,
being able to get employment benefits because they don't understand the system,
yeah,
or so there's a lot of issues going on now. Housing, there's a big housing crisis here. So, when you're from some other country and you look very different from the native population here, and you don't speak the language and you
mm,
don't have a job,
yeah,
and your savings are like that little, how do you find accommodation here? And you can't go back home. So I think that there is a lot of, I would say, serious problems that
yeah.
have come in the wake of this, that actually I am seeing through my community, and people do ping me on LinkedIn, for help with these things, and it's actually really sad for me sometimes because I can't help people find apartments, or these
Yeah,
things, but I do see that this is the consequence
that's
of a
right.
lot of the overhiring.
And I guess that links into, in some ways, the way I see it is exactly what you're saying. Because if something can't show value, you know, how can I say this without sounding too harsh? You always say like, whenever there's job cuts, people say, oh, the marketing or talent are the first to go because they
Mhm.
don't provide value straight away. And generally, it's like the salespeople that are the last to go because they're the ones kind of selling, right? So it's quite easy to see a salesperson's relevant output because they've just made a sale that's worth 1 million and everyone's excited about it. And I guess that goes back to what you're saying about data is that in your community, if the data community can't show its value to, the people that make business decisions about heads and human resources or talent, then then they are quite vulnerable, aren't they?
Yeah, this is definitely the issue.
Yeah,
I think also, I mean, this is a very complex problem in the social
100%. Yeah, yeah,
aspects of it,
mm,
but I do think it's A, the value, and B, the cost.
yeah.
And I think this tooling, I talk a lot about the culture of tooling, and this needs to change as well. The people that I think people buy too many tools, okay, and then
Okay.
they integrate
Just
them
just
and
for
they
the lay people here, what do you mean by tooling? Just so, do I know? Yeah.
like a software package,
Right.
like
Okay.
like a piece of software that does a specific thing, okay, and then
Sure.
you usually have to pay some subscription fee to it. And it's a problem that when new managers come in, they buy tools, or because you have people
Yeah.
who are so interested in the tools, they buy the tools, and
Then they've
just
still got
there's
the
so
old tools. They've got all
yeah,
the tools.
they're still
Yeah.
paying tools, and then they have to integrate all the tools, and then they underestimate the resources, and then they have to pay for more people, and it's just this ever growing amount of complexity that creates the need for more headcount. And it's really what's the source of all of this? It's technocracy. So where people are just focused on the very interesting technology behind data without being interested in the finances. Um, and it's people not taking into account the complexity. Every time you make a new tool, or every time you buy a new tool, you have this like tool. You have like the drag of human capital that you need to support the tool. And this is something that people don't understand or they don't want to understand, and they just go for the tool. Yeah, I actually talked to a lot of vendors about
Mm,
this.
yeah.
And this is something new coming from being a data leader to
Mm,
now, like, blogging,
yeah.
is I get to really have great conversations with the vendors that I never had before.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
learning that vendors are seeing this as a problem because I thought, okay, whatever, I'm a vendor and I just sell the tool, and that's great because I just want to sell and sell and sell, and that's how I make money as a
Mm.
vendor. That was my
What you want
view
is
on it.
renewals, isn't it? You want them to say, actually, I've had it for 2 years, so I want it even more, and actually, I want more of it. We're only going to do
Yeah,
that
and
if it actually has proved to be useful for you, right?
yeah, and then they say, yeah, but then it's not really that great what's going on because we get the sales, but we don't get the renewals, and we get unhappy customers,
Yeah,
and
yeah. And
yeah.
implementing for the vendor costs money. So they probably like write off the first year of the contract because they have to implement it. And the way they really make money is the second and the third year, which is like, right, okay, it's working for you now. Would you like more licenses or another 5 years of the and a happy customer says, yes, please, I really need that. So that whole customer success element is so important. And we see it in recruitment as well. There's so many different tools. I think tooling is a really important thing. One last question I had was been a very interesting kind of conversation, but I'm just quite kind of interested in the kind of I've asked a few people about this, the kind of the AI element of all of this. How you feel. Maybe there's a lot of moves and talks about kind of AI, Chat GPT, that sort of thing at the moment. How do you think that will kind of affect the the data industry as well? Just in a kind of few quick kind of moments, if you think it will have a real kind of effect on the world that you inhabit.
I think that making things human understandable and making processes able to be kicked off and managed in human understandable language rather than code is very valuable because that makes actually coding, which is a huge bottleneck, actually code the ability to the reliance on people who can code is a huge expensive bottleneck, and it actually removes that, and it makes us able to focus on the architecture, on the business question, on value stream, and that's huge. And I find that a huge opportunity. And I think in terms of recruiting, what it's going to do is people are going to look probably much more focused, looking for focused hires. It's probably going to help the overhiring because this expensive bottleneck of always needing these junior coders to,
Yeah, do the
you know, you,
code as it were. Yeah. Because in the end, what it links into is a question you can put together. So a data set for your business, whatever data set you could write. I've been playing around with these types of things, and you can get them to kind of create things for you. You can get them to create things. I mean, there's elements that it can't do. Obviously, I think it is. There's elements of Emperor's New Clothes if you ask it some questions, and it's like, you know, if I ask it who's going to win the Premiership this year in soccer, it never can give me the right answer. But that's because it doesn't know live data, does it? And that sort of thing. But I think overall, it's a very kind of interesting kind of aspect of it. And like you said, I mean, I'm just thinking to myself about kind of data in terms of when the printing press and kind of writing and all that sort of stuff. When that it used to be just monks that you could write, couldn't it? You could only there was only certain people that could write, so the kind of education and intelligence in some ways was kind of held within a very small amount of people. And I guess what your argument is sometimes that's like what programmers are. They're like kind of very specialist people that can't do stuff, whereas this element of actually looking at what they do and how they do it and what you actually want to get out of your business, you want to be able to make data driven decisions as a business person, don't you? And you want to be able to have the right data that you need. And I think what you're arguing is let's try and make that as easily accessible and as useful as we possibly can, right?
yeah, that's exactly. And I love that analogy to the monks
Yeah.
because I mean, people learning to read did not put monks out of business.
No.
They're still around. There was maybe other things that put monks out of business, but it wasn't the printing press.
No, that's right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it still must be a few monks. They're kind of well, they've got their vows of silence and they're making wine and honey and that sort of thing instead now, aren't they? The monks. So yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, I think not very often you'll get the monks and data scientists, but we feel me and Elizabeth feel they're very similar. So there we go. Good stuff.
But that's actually a really good analogy. They were the keepers of this knowledge in the medieval ages, and then at one point it got democratized.
That socially, if we really want to go into history, that caused a lot of upheaval, didn't it, in terms of religious wars and that sort of thing. But hey, this is the wrong podcast for that sort of stuff, Elizabeth.
Yeah, that's actually opening up a whole lot of interesting conversation. We can have another podcast. We can have a whole series
Exactly.
based on
Yeah, fantastic. Good stuff. Well, it's been great to speak to you today. I've really enjoyed the conversation. A little plug, if you're going to give the URL there, Elizabeth, just so if people want to kind of go onto the D3M website and have a look, what is it?
www.d3mlabs.de.
Fantastic, and it's got some really great resources, really interesting conversations, and something that if you're interested in data or leading a business that is making data-driven decisions, is definitely one that I would suggest you kind of go and have a look at. I definitely have been. So, thank you very much,
And
Elizabeth.
and sign up for our newsletter too. Every month we also send a digest of a lot of different thought leadership.
Brilliant, fantastic, Elizabeth. Thank you very much for your time, and I hope you have a great day.